This is the 110th episode of Woman Being, plus or minus a few episodes. And I am joined by the beautiful Kellyanne and the amazing Emma. And we are going to actually do a little throwback episode today where we go back and review clips of ourselves and who we were when the podcast started and talk about who we are now. And there's some juicy moments that we're going to go back into. So we can't wait to share this with you, and we will be back in a second after we dive right in. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
And we are back. I'm working on limited sleep, so y'all just hang in there.
We're in it with you.
Yeah, we really are.
We are here to support.
Hang out till the end of the episode because we're going to be sharing some special announcements about ourselves, about Woman Being, and you don't want to miss it. But in the meantime, we are going to dive into just some little past clips of ourselves. And I thought it would be fun to open with this little promo. I don't know if you guys remember, but we used to do we did a separate promo for each of our episodes.
Oh,
that were usually kind of funny and random.
Well, at least we thought they were funny.
They were really
and
great,
for the
didn't
most
we?
part, really embarrassing and not strategic in any way. So this is one of our first book club episode promos. We're reviewing the book Educated. Have you ever been educated? Okay.
Do you want to be educated on educated?
Educate.
And that's what we're here to
educated.
do. Get educated. You need to buy the book. You got to buy it on a Kindle. You got to buy it in the physical. You got to buy it in your head. You got to buy it everywhere. You need to give Tara Westover all of your money.
Give her all your money.
And also save the environment.
A,
Birthday
for educated. B, educated. C, educated. D, wine.
D for wine, obviously.
D for wine.
Obviously.
This book is so important that I don't even have the words to say how much you need to buy it because it's so important to me. Okay.
Woman Being goes with you wherever you go.
Ever you go.
And you have
you're always being
all your sisters
woman.
with you.
Get educated with us on Tuesday.
Ooh, so spicy.
So that's a spicy little opener.
I feel like for context, at the time, Chris D'Elia's comedy bit about girls being drunk
Right.
was all the rage. And so we were like, oh, what if we make fun of Chris D'Elia making fun of us as white women? I don't know. And so we thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
It
we
was
were
like a
leaning
drunk
into the
girls.
bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, the whole premise or part of the premise of our book club is that we drink while we talk about it.
Right.
So we were pretending to be
Pretending?
drunk
What do you
girls.
mean? That's how I always act when I'm drunk.
And I just can't believe we put that out on the internet.
It lives on the internet forever.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's no one I'd rather do that with.
So now, future employers can find that.
Definitely.
Potential suitors can find that.
Yeah, that could be interesting for you, Hannah.
And it's just out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you guys. Are you ready to get educated on who we once were?
Yeah. I mean, so part of our whole mantra on the podcast is that we have the freedom to change our minds, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to look back at all this stuff. A lot of the stuff that we're pulling from is the first season of the podcast. And we get to see how we have changed our minds and how we speak differently and how we act differently and how maybe we would make a promo differently nowadays.
Also, I think how much we've gotten into a flow together. Looking back at old content, it's so different. Seeing how we try to basically host a podcast.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot better at it, I feel like, over the years.
We were so stiff in a lot of the episodes I see.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so, like, I remember when we first launched, some of my friends were like, oh my gosh, you're putting on a podcast voice. And I was like, I am? I had no idea. And I look back and I'm like, why am I doing that podcast voice? Because I totally was. But I just was like, this is how we talk in the podcast.
Right.
Subconsciously. That's just what we had to do.
Right.
And so it's really interesting because I feel like now we have so much more comfort being on camera, being on mics, and just chatting.
Well, we've also just changed so much fundamentally.
Oh, yeah.
Like in so many different ways.
Yeah.
In terms of like our faith and our worldviews and like how we view ourselves. I mean, we're almost 30. Woo!
Wow. Yeah.
Someday we'll come back to this clip and we'll cringe at. No, just kidding.
Like, oh, why did we all just white girl?
We just wooed.
I mean, I love a good woo. So.
We're woo girls right now.
We are woo girls.
So all that being said, let's watch another cringy clip
I love it.
and reflect.
You feel really fragile.
Yes.
You feel like a little delicate flower that can just be crumpled, and then you're worthless. But that's not true.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that's actually giving other people the power that God has.
Yes.
Which is the power to give you worth. And God actually freely gives us all worth.
Yeah.
And to say that somebody else could take some of your worth away is actually, it's kind of idolizing them.
So scary.
You're saying that they have that authority over you. And they, in fact, they don't.
Yeah. And like, you're not a piece of pie. Like,
You're not a piece
you're
of
not
pie.
a piece of pie. If you're going to walk away with anything, remember that.
Oh my
Remember, you're not a
gosh.
piece of pie.
The fact that we led in with my like, let me like just repeat back to you the harmful things you've been told your entire purity culture journey, and then just be like, but it's not true. And I'm like, wow, Kellyanne.
Yeah. So that one, when I saw that clip, it was like surprising to me to see how, like, it wasn't that surprising. Well, okay. It was surprising to me to see how Christianese I sounded because it's just not a way that I talk as much anymore. And I perceived myself as someone who didn't really speak in Christianese at that time. So then, like, me speaking about modesty in that way and, like, lust and purity culture feels like, she was off base
Who is she?
in terms of like her perception of herself. But then what really surprised me was how y'all were like, so into it.
So I was with you in your preach.
Yes.
I was like, say it again, Emma.
Yes. Amen. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, because I think, especially now at this point, where I'm in the position that I'm the only person who still practices Christianity of the three of us, I'm like, well, I must have always been the one who was like, just talking about it, you know?
Yeah.
And then, but like, it was a reminder, it was like, oh, when we first started, like, we were all talking about it, like, from the perspective of believers.
Right.
And so that's like, it's so different.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to I mean, to me, everything sounds like Christianese, though. You know, it's not like it's the terms that you used. It's just like the genuine, I don't know, way that you're going about talking about God, and it sounds like a Bible study.
Interesting. So, do you think that I sound Christianese when I talk about God now?
No,
but I don't think you sounded Christianese in the clip either. I mean,
Really?
I think you sounded like a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, who's talking about God.
Yeah.
But you didn't use like Christianese terms.
Oh, so I feel like I did because I say things like, you're basically idolizing these other people.
Sure.
By like giving them the power to determine your modesty and that kind of thing. Like, that's, to me, I was like, ooh, I don't think I would ever say you're idolizing someone hardly at all unless you're like a stalker and obsessed with them.
Right. That's so interesting too, though, to me, to hear you talk about how you're like, oh, I feel so Christian in this clip. Because to me, you were my edgy friend. Like, you weren't like the good girlfriend. You were the one being like, oh, you shouldn't like idolize people in that way. And I was like, oh my God, I never would have thought of that. Like, to me, it was just like, it kind of shook up my worldview in a great way, even in the midst of your Christianese.
Well, Happy to serve.
All right. Well, we were talking about purity culture in that clip. And as everyone knows who has listened to this podcast, we have extensively talked about purity culture. I mean, you could almost argue that we've written a thesis on purity culture. We could probably just assemble all the things that we've done and just like put it into an essay and we'd have it. Point being, purity culture and modesty and sex came up a lot. So the next clip I have is a story on modesty. Personally, I never was pushing the boundaries beyond what other normal girls were wearing. And so definitely for me, with modesty, as a young girl, I just wanted to, fit in, look the same, feel cute. It was never like, I was not a Miley Cyrus, which Miley Cyrus, I commend you. Just a little shout out. But I wasn't trying to like go to school topless or anything like that. So just clarifying as we talk about modesty and how it's not effective, we are talking about, okay, like it's okay to wear a bikini. It's okay to wear leggings. And then beyond that, I mean, and Kelly can speak into this too, because maybe we have some extreme thoughts, but I think if we didn't live in a fallen world, then why not be nudists? Like, why not admire the beauty that God created us in? Like, what if nudity wasn't a big deal?
Yeah.
And everybody was naked and it was just normal. I mean, like, I think that would be great. Obviously, that's a little... I actually still stand by that.
We used to do shout outs all the time.
The way that you're just casually like, a little shout out to you, Miley. As if she's listening. Just, Miley, shout out to you. Great job.
Commend you. I want to just say that again. Miley, I commend you.
You know what, Miley? We all commend you.
Yeah.
Flowers, here for it. Love it.
Here for it.
But that was some Christianese there, I guess, that I brought up.
Totally.
In, like, fallen world.
Yeah.
And this idea that, like, the reason that things go wrong is because of this, like, sin, this original sin that then brought us into a fallen state. And that if we weren't in a fallen state, or when we are no longer in a fallen state, things will be good. Maybe we will all be nudists, which I think is interesting to, I don't know. On one hand, I look back on what I said and I'm like, well, that was quite progressive for who I was at the time. Because, I mean, Christians just don't talk like that. But on the other hand, I'm like, why can't you be nudist now?
I actually would posit that Christians do talk like that in terms of it's one extreme or the other, which is really interesting. So it's like, I think that's the argument a lot of the time that evangelicals will give is like, well, if you don't have this moral standard, then what, you're just going to be naked all the time? Or if you don't have this moral standard about murder, you just go kill people? And it's like, excuse me, like, just because you're not a Christian, you're going to kill people? Real. Like, those are examples people use. Like, or even like, oh, if you're going to be okay with sex before marriage, you're going to run around and like sleep around with everyone you see and like get pregnant outside of wedlock, and you're going to like, you're going to go to this extreme. Like, what? There's this idea of like, you are one radical or the other. And so it's fascinating that that's the...
Totally. Well, it's almost like the way that you learn logic in evangelicalism is this, like, if this, then that. Sort of thing. Which,
totally.
Yeah, super real. But yeah, what's interesting about that clip, too, is going back and remembering how slighted and maybe burned I felt by teachings on modesty in the church and how I had been raised. And it still affects me to this day, but I still get angry about it, I guess. Like, I'm still like, yeah, modesty's stupid, but I definitely don't feel like this weight of like, I don't know, a need to prove that I'm still good, or this weight of a need to prove that this is bad anymore. And so, but that was like a huge emphasis for me. Like, when you consider the realm of purity culture and things that affected me, modesty was this sort of like, I don't know, dark horse.
Yeah.
Where I was like, oh, this is like this thing that I must overcome.
Yeah.
And I feel like now I wrote a thought of the week about this recently, actually, where it's like, I'm learning how to just wear what I feel comfortable in. And I don't have to feel comfortable in something that has a low neckline. And I don't have to feel comfortable in something that has a high neckline. Like I can wear what feels natural and breathable and comfortable and cute to me. And like being able to do that without considering like who's looking at me and what they're going to say. But not that I'm saying that it doesn't still affect me. Like one time I wore a low-cut shirt to a party and I felt very exposed. But,
and I'm sure there's like new factors with that in having a changed body now after pregnancy.
Yeah, I was super pregnant at the time and had like my boobs were just like
there's no controlling them.
Huge.
They looked amazing, listeners.
Anyways, so yeah, and learning like, okay, I feel uncomfortable with this and I don't have to blame purity culture or like maybe the men that I think might be thinking whatever I think they might be thinking.
Right.
I can actually just go, hey, I wore that and I actually didn't feel comfortable and I don't have to put myself through that. So I'm going to wear something else next time.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. I do think there's a tension with that of like, as you're deconstructing modesty culture of, I know I've had the temptation to just swing the other direction, just wear, I don't know, the sluttiest thing I can find, for lack of better words. And that's really, I mean, there's a time and place, you know, and figuring out like, oh, do I actually feel comfortable in this? Or am I just like wearing something revealing because I can? Or because I feel like I should now that I've like deconstructed this? I think there's a back and forth in my mind with that.
Yeah.
And figuring out just like, what do I like?
Exactly.
As opposed to what covers me properly.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's sort of been it is like you kind of swing and you have to experiment and try new things and just learning to like, oh, this experience I enjoyed, this one I didn't enjoy. And I think getting out of purity culture, and I think it is important to wear whatever you're going to wear and do what you're going to do and learn from it and then kind of learn to discover your own preferences.
Yeah.
So anyways. Totally. It's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Also, a shout out that is our most viewed episode.
Still?
I believe so. It has so many views on YouTube.
What?
Specifically.
Yeah, let me see what 60K.
What?
60,000 people just on YouTube.
Oh my gosh.
It probably helps that we labeled it "Join Our Nudist Colony."
Yes. Yeah. I do think it's like mostly 40-year-old men and they watch like the first 10 minutes and then they're like, then they're not
This
naked.
isn't what I thought it was. Yeah.
But that's an example of how clickbait can give you a lot of views.
Yep.
So that's just hilarious to me.
It is hilarious.
So speaking of things that are hilarious, I have an interesting clip that the moment we said we were going to do a clip episode, I was like, I have to bring this one up. It has to be.
You had it in the archives.
Yeah, I knew it. Because I have regretted this one, actually,
Have you?
kind of. I mean, maybe regret's a strong word, but it's just like, I just so don't stand by this. And I didn't stand by it anymore not that long after the episode. Like, this is, like, my opinions around this had shifted after not a lot of time.
My advice or my stance, if someone were to ask me, should I have sex before marriage, I would probably say no.
Yeah.
But I'm also not going to say that you're going to be ruined, you know, if you do. And I know people and have great friends who have had sex outside of marriage and they have either stepped away from that and said, that was a mistake and I'm not going to do it again. But, you know, I'm still good and I'm still whole and I'm still loved by God. And I've had people who have stepped away from abusive sexual relationships and it's been really traumatizing.
So, I mean, that's just not my opinion anymore. Like, I don't think that abstinence is the prescription to give people. And that was our episode all about abstinence.
Yep.
And at that point, I think Kellyanne was the only person who was like, I don't think you need to be abstinent. And we were like,
oh my God, that's a good thing she's already married.
But it's interesting to hear me even talking about like friends of mine who had sex and their experiences. And I never frame it in like, oh, there's some people where it can be fine or where it could be good. Like even the the people I talked about where it's like, oh, they've had sex and they recognized it was not the right thing, but they're also recognizing they're still good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people who've been traumatized. Those were my two options that I gave.
Yeah, either you do it and you're fine and you move on, or you do it and you're terribly traumatized.
Yeah.
So just
and
don't
it's
do
like,
it.
but it's not fine and move on. It's it's wrong and you're
Right.
fine and you move on.
Right.
And so that was my frame of reference at the time.
Yeah.
And like, I think that part of purity culture was probably the part that had the biggest like hold on me, like more than like the modesty stuff and like different, like it was just very ingrained and hard for me to be like, I can think something different about this. And also thinking, oh, people can have healthy sexual relationships outside of marriage. That was not a concept for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I remember responding to you or like answering whatever the question was, like if we would say you should still wait until marriage, I think is what we asked. And I remember I was just like repeating, I was like, purity comes from the Lord. So anything you do doesn't matter. It's just, it's all depends on the blood of Jesus, I think was sort of my answer, and I probably added a caveat of like, which doesn't mean you don't obey the Bible. But it does mean that ultimately your source of purity is Jesus. Or what I'm fairly certain that was my stance at the time. And couldn't be more different. Well, and I think I've deconstructed the idea of purity as at all. I mean, maybe not at all, but like purity to me doesn't mean virginity at all. Like there's no synonymous virgin to purity pathway in my brain, I guess. And I feel like something that is pure can also be something that's very human. Back then, I think purity meant godly or divine or holy. And the only way you could be godly, divine, or holy was through some sort of sanctification process.
Right. Well, and again, like what we were saying at the time for like the environment we were coming from was very, very radical.
That's the weird part.
Isn't that so crazy?
We were being very like cutting edge.
Yeah.
It feels so like conservative and sweet and Christian now to me.
Totally. Yeah. And I remember too, like at the time I had like processed like the reason I was like, I think you can have sex, like it's fine, was because when I got married, like I remember kind of expecting this like crazy shift to happen. And the next day you wake up and you're like, I'm married, I'm not a virgin anymore, everything's different. And it wasn't that way. Like you felt the same. Like
there was no transcendent honeymoon experience where you've now been touched.
Right. Yeah, it's just it wasn't that. And I'm like, okay, like so this is all bullshit. And like I wasn't ready yet to admit that it was bullshit. And I think I felt the need to just like I'm noticing in these clips how agreeable I was. I wanted to affirm so much so. I don't know why. But I was just like, no, I'm like, I'm allowed to have my belief. You're allowed to have your belief. And it's not about like if we're right or wrong. It's about like what works for us. And so it's really interesting to like look back on and just see how younger Kellyanne handled those kinds of things.
Like, do you feel like you represented yourself as agreeing when you meant to be more like, I'm affirming that you can have that opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I feel like if someone objectively watched that, it'd be like, oh, she agrees. Like if they just watched that clip.
I definitely didn't agree with you.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be like, oh, of course you can have that opinion.
Sure.
Like, I think that's like when I hear like the way I say, like that's what that means. When I say, like as in, of course you can say that.
Yeah. Basically.
I mean,
so
I
funny.
didn't disagree with you at the time, but it was like, that's your opinion.
Yeah.
But it does sound like totally that is the truth.
100% say it again, preach.
Yeah.
So speaking of purity culture, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, Kelly, like we all had a lot to say about it. And there was one.
It's actually one of the first things we say our podcast is about.
Yeah, that's true.
In our episode 0, I rewatched it this morning and we say like, this podcast is going to be about like purity culture and also this and this and this. But that was the first one we listed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no wonder it's been such a big part of our conversations.
Yeah. And to be honest, it feels like it has continued to be a theme. Like we have so much to say still. I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever be done having things to say about purity culture, but also that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and it intersects with so much of the female experience, even in like non-religious spaces.
Totally.
So with our like culture that shames women's sexuality and like also over-sexualizes women, and like all of that intersects with the Christian purity culture.
Agreed.
So I think it comes up all the time anyways.
Well, and I think it's still valid. Like the things we said then were things that people who were in that space needed to hear.
Yes.
Right? So even now, if people are going back and listening through the episodes, they're all on different versions of their own journey. And so different things that we've said throughout are going to maybe resonate differently.
Yep.
And so I don't look at it, I don't look back and go like, ugh, you know, I look back and go, oh, that's interesting. That was really important to me at the time.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how I don't feel that like deep, I don't know, justice button about that thing now.
Yeah.
Even though we still talk about it and it's still something we are continuing to deconstruct.
Totally. Yeah, I pulled back a thought of the week from 2022, and it really showcases like how far I've come, which is pretty phenomenal, honestly. And it's things that helped my purity culture recovery. And there's a lot of things. This only listed 8, but the first slide says nonlinear movement practice saved me. And I'm currently now actually getting certified in this method, which is a pretty like full circle moment. And I don't know why, but the last like few years, like this was a really impactful thing for me. And the last year, I just kind of like forgot it existed. And I've been doing a lot of other like trauma trainings and becoming a somatic practitioner. And so I just didn't have the space for a lot of other practices. But recently it came up and I just applied to get to the program like on a whim and got accepted. And now I'm in the midst of learning how to guide people through this methodology that has so deeply helped me and impacted me. And it's just kind of one of those really wild full circle moments. But also I'm like, wow, I'm really proud of myself. Like I moved through a lot of shit and like a lot of that trauma.
You
literally.
Non-linearly through all that shit.
And honestly, like if anyone like listening, if you have survived purity culture, honestly, give it a try. It might not be for you, but it really, really helped me. And I know it helps a lot of other people. So 10 out of 10.
That's so good. I'm so proud of you too.
Thanks.
Yeah. I loved it. Was actually shocking to me when you were like, didn't realize I was talking about nonlinear movement all the way back then.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I'm like, Kellyanne's been, nonlinear movement gal forever.
You were nonlinear movement gal the moment I met you.
Yes.
And you still are that person to this day to me.
Yeah. And it really, I think, has made an impact. And I think it's a lot of the reason why I can feel so comfortable in my body now. Because, you're just literally rebuilding that connection and that relationship and that listening to the conversation. Like my body, like just a couple days ago, I've been feeling anxious about a couple things, and I felt this like beautiful message from my body like, hey, no matter what happens, you have me. Like people come and go, things like change constantly. You truly don't own anything in this life, like really. But at the end of the day, for all of my days, I will have my body. And like that can be my partner and my friend and all of these things. And so it's all that to say, I think it's a beautiful practice and I think it's very helpful.
I love that so much.
Thanks, Cal.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit into...
Shift them
right into more of our like theology and our thoughts about God and who we were. And I'm going to open this with a clip from our second episode where I answered the question, what does woman being mean to me?
A classic question.
Yes. And it's really interesting. And yeah, we'll just watch it and then I'll extrapolate from there. Woman being means that the Lord created me in his image. And because of that, I bear the image of God. So the femininity that comes out of me, the strength, the softness, the sexiness, all of the things that make up who I am, that is in the image of God. And I have the honor of carrying and reflecting that beauty to the world. So that's what woman being means to me. So this is interesting because this is the second time. My first clip I was like this too, but the second time where I'm just referring to anything that is me is of God, right? And I've noticed sort of this pattern of like I kind of had this disconnected view of self that was anything me removed and everything God present, if that makes sense. Like he has replaced the bad me. Yeah. And so everything that comes out of me is sort of sanctified through God and a reflection of him. And so I didn't really, this has been like the whole journey, I think, of this podcast is getting away from that kind of thinking and like knowing myself in a different way. But also I held a lot of tenderness for episode 2, Kelly, because I was doing everything I could to explore the gray areas and stay anchored in this faith that was so important to me, but like see it through this lens that I had been taught to see things through, but also like expand my view. I think my whole idea was like, God's not afraid of any of these topics that we dive into. And so if he's not afraid of them, I won't be afraid of them. And it's probably to episode 2, Kelly's dismay has led me along such a different path. But I think also what I was doing at that time was so radical for myself and for the context that I grew up in that it's also, I feel very proud.
I feel really proud of you. And honestly, as I'm watching that clip and thinking about it, I just see, because I feel like your answer was reflective of kind of where I was coming from as well. And I just remember like I was so badly begging for permission from the church to just be allowed to be. And like that's kind of what I brought into at first this space. It was like, just let me be. Like, let me be a woman. Let me show up in my fullness. Let me do all these things. And I think the answer that I found is like, actually the church doesn't, or at least my church context that I come from, church didn't want me to actually do that.
Right.
And so I was like, all right. Then I got to dip out. And that it's just so interesting to like look back at that and hear kind of where you were coming from and then reminiscing on similarly where I was coming from.
Yeah, because I think there's so much wrapped up in that Christian, maybe specifically evangelicalism messaging that requires you to have this deep purpose and it requires you to have this deep like undoing of oneself in order for God to take over and like make an impact on the world and, you know, change the world for the better. And so there's so much pressure to put yourself in a position that is just so that God can move through you and change the world, you know? And it results in a lack of being. You're dissociated from the present circumstances because you're always thinking forward and you're always thinking heaven. And yeah, you don't value sitting outside in your garden and admiring the flowers unless you're meditating on how beautiful God is when you're doing it, you know?
Yep.
And so it almost is like an obsession with inserting your theology into every single thing in your life, which again, I think there's something admirable about that. Like people of faith really who do that well, I admire like how dedicated and zealous they are. But I think also in that process for me, I removed myself from so many, from so much of what was life.
Yeah.
And what was living on earth.
I think that if you had said all of those things about what woman being is without referencing God, then, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that could be perceived as like prideful in that evangelical space that you were coming from. Like, it's like, well, it's humble if I'm still directing it to God. Right. That all of this is stemming from God. This isn't my doing. This isn't my own thing.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it would be conceited.
Yes, I'm just the reflection.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm not sexy and soft and strong and whatever. I'm just reflecting God's beauty and strength.
Yeah. Also so funny to me that you said your sexiness comes from God, which is great.
Yeah,
But
I still stand by that.
It's like, that was probably so like
So edgy.
Well, and I kind of
for
do
us.
this because it was
Do
edgy.
you?
I was like, I sort of shimmied. I was like, sexy, you know? Like, oh, I'm going to say it.
Yeah. It is really, really interesting to see how we are redirecting our sexiness or our womanhood onto God in a lot of ways. And I have a clip that actually pertains to that a little bit that I'm going to share now.
The femininity of the Holy Spirit is something that has become part of my deconstruction journey. And I actually think of Holy Spirit as my sister and my mother, and as this feminine side, if you will, of God. Because God is very feminine. God has a womb and labor pains, and God speaks in a way that is motherly and nurturing. And so that's one thing that has become part of my like vernacular since deconstructing things, or as I've been deconstructing things, is like, okay, I can actually think of God in a more expansive way, and recognize even biblically, like the way that Holy Spirit is spoken about is a woman.
So again, I feel that there's some Christianese in there that I don't love, especially in like the Trinitarian concepts that I'm touching on. That's just like not even in my realm of how I talk about things anymore. But I got like pushback from friends when I would talk about how God was also feminine or also a woman. And people were like, excuse me, you can't say that. Like, that's not okay. And that's like heretical, essentially. And we were all, I think, deconstructing our view of like God's gender and kind of how that played into things. And for me now, like, there's things in that I think are valid. Like, I do think that the Bible presents a God that is feminine and masculine. I think that's true. I don't think that there's this like Trinity anymore, really. So that's another thing, is that God is actually kind of all of the things all at once. Also, God is all of the genders all at once. So for me, like, there's more of a gender spectrum to God now. So I don't know that I would say like God is a woman. I also wouldn't say God is a man. I primarily refer to God in they, them pronouns, because God is deity and God is divinity. Like, God is not a human form, but God also is a human form because God is everything. But that's all. That's my twisted like way of talking about something that's not really easy to talk about in terms of framing what is God. But
What's interesting to me about it is I look back, and we didn't realize we were doing this at the time, and I wasn't intentionally doing this at the time, but it was almost as if to expand our view of selves, we had to expand our view of God. Like, as we explored what is woman being, it absolutely required that we then look at, divinity and go, well, what is God?
yeah.
And so God surely isn't just a man. And we look, we use the Bible as context and whatever. And it's almost like we explored maybe the vastness or the growing possibilities of who God is outside of our like narrow theological context. And thus we're able to see ourselves more clearly, which maybe even led the way onto, wherever else we've been since then. But it was like, there's not permission to look at myself as woman until God is woman too.
Yeah. That's so interesting to hear you. I'm having like a brain aneurysm as you talk about this, because in a way I'm like, okay, like, you're totally right. We had to, I would agree with you. Like, I had to expand my view of who God was and who God could be in order to expand my view of myself and permission for myself to explore and grow. But in a way, I'm like, this exploration, I think, really did like set me free. You know, like the original like gospel intention of like the Lord is good, where the Spirit of the Lord is freedom, and all of those very Christian things that we think looks a specific way as in the Christian practice and manifestation of the church and how they choose to operate within that sphere. But for me, I'm like, oh no, actually I feel the freest I've ever been in my entire life outside of Christianity. And actually I do feel like the God of the Bible in a way has led me there.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I've started changing my wording. I don't say I've lost my faith anymore. I say that faith led me out of evangelicalism. Like my faith is still with me.
Yeah.
I have maintained my faith, and it was faith that caused me to look at inconsistencies in doctrine and action, inconsistencies in, you know, the teachings of Jesus and the message of the mainstream church, and problems with the way that people are treated, et cetera. Like faith enabled me to look at those things and say, this is not divine in any way. You know, there's nothing holy about the abuse of women and children in churches. And there's nothing holy about the people that are perpetrating these problems, et cetera. And so, yeah, I've actually changed my vernacular to say, like, no, I did not lose my faith. Faith is what led me out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think looking at this clip specifically is a big reminder to me of kind of how gradual a lot of this has been. At least for me, like that was a clip from 2 years ago, and it was, so like what, 2022 or 2021. And I had started considering God as female in like 2018, 2019, and like had slowly been like coming out with that, like, and actually telling people that, which like that was a process as well, because like I said, I did get pushback. But it's interesting to see how that's expanded and changed gradually year by year. And it's really beautiful that we get to do that. We get to change year by year and keep growing and changing our minds.
Yeah, and it's even more beautiful that the values that we like assigned to this podcast at the beginning, I really feel like we've lived out.
We have.
And I haven't been like reciting them to myself every day. Like, I have the freedom to change my mind, and this is a safe space where we explore. Like, I don't say those things to myself.
No.
Like, but it feels like in the practice of coming here and having this ritual almost of talking about these things and going, this is a subject that we're agreeing to explore, even though it's scary. In that process, like we've lived out those values in a really cool way.
Yeah.
I have chills.
Oh, as we're talking about like growing and changing, I have been looking back at old thought of the weeks in preparation for this episode, and holy shit, the amount of growth and change that I've seen in myself. I found another thought of the week from 2022, and it's so cool. Like, in a way, what we've done while we're processing, we kind of have an online diary is kind of what we've created in addition to other things. There's many things that this podcast is, but to me, reading back through some of these old like diary pages just shows me how far I've come and how much I've grown. So my thought of the week from 2022, which is so crazy, reads, Christianity crippled me. Recently, I've been feeling directionless and like I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I used to feel a lot of purpose and direction with everything I did. It was all because I had purpose and meaning through my religious practice. God had a destiny for me, and it was my job to walk out that destiny. During deconstruction, I noticed many ways I was giving away my power, choice, and desires in the name of God. I decided that's not what God wanted for me, and I started to process owning those things for myself. It's been a few years, and it's still hard and painful. I feel like a child that's been severely coddled, therefore not knowing how to do anything. A lot of my time is spent asking myself what I want to do, who I want to be, and where I want to be going. But I don't know how to sit under the pressure of that ownership because I never learned. I still have faith, though it might not look how it once did, and my practice has shifted drastically. But in a lot of ways, Christianity crippled me. Not knowing what I want if I don't feel purpose or destiny is one of them. my inability to listen to my inner voice and follow the direction I want to go in has become something really hard for me. Basically, I'm learning to walk again and stand on my own 2 feet. And reading that, I'm like, wow, I really did feel so much pressure. And like, I didn't know how to process this horrible thing in my mind that was happening to me, which was losing my faith. And learning how to tap into who Kelly Carter is outside of this religion was really scary, really anxiety inducing, and really depressing. Like, I was like low level depressed. And it's like, what do you do when everything you've known your entire life is no longer true to you? And standing here today, who I am, Kelly Carter is so driven. Kelly Carter has so much direction. Kelly Carter is so smart and so capable. And like, there are so many things I'm going after in my life, and realizing just 2 years can really change your life. And like I was saying in my thought of the week, I didn't know at the time how to sit with the heaviness of what all that meant. And so I had to like literally just allow myself to like hold that space in my life and be like, I don't know. I don't fucking know. And in the not knowing, you start discovering. And that just shows to me, again, like we've been talking about, like you have the freedom to change your mind. Like the process of changing your mind is so scary and so hard. But if you sit with it, you will get where you'll get somewhere. I don't know if it'll be good. I don't know if it'll be bad, but you won't be in the same space in 2 years. I pinky swear. And I feel really grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say listening to your old thought of the week, it feels so dissonant from who I know you to be in terms of saying like, you feel you have no purpose outside of Christianity. And I'm like, Kellyanne has always had so much purpose. Like she's brimming with purpose. Like she has so much direction, and like you are so, like you said, driven and like going after things. And so it's like a little bit of cognitive dissonance to me to hear former Kellyanne saying, I feel purposeless and like aimless without this faith. I mean, obviously I knew that because I read that thought of the week at the time. Yeah. But like, I don't know that I like knew it. Right. Knew that you felt like it didn't resonate that you felt that way. So it's really interesting.
It is interesting to hear. Isn't it? It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing I really resonated with you when you did write it, because I'm like, yeah, no, I get that. Like feeling a little bit like disadvantaged because of where I came from and not. But I think what's more profound is how not disadvantaged you have made yourself. You know, like all of us are going to have our vices that come from our past that, you know, have, you know, weren't as good of an opportunity as we could have had, or, you know, made us believe a certain way that, you know, prevented us from exploring this opportunity or whatever. But I've only ever seen you fight for yourself in all of that. And so maybe Christianity gave you a couple hard punches, but like you're not crippled.
Thank you. I don't feel so either. I think if anything, that was the process of accepting the fact that I have a chip on my shoulder. Being like, yeah, I have a chip on my shoulder. It's a part of me. Like, I'm not trying to heal it. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not trying to pretend it's not there anymore. Like, it's there.
Yeah, and I think that's super valid and important.
Thanks.
I, too, have been sifting through Thought of the Weeks. I don't know if you lovely listeners who are also followers on Instagram/TikTok have noticed that sometimes we repost old things because we don't have the content all the time. And so when I've gone through old Thought of the Weeks and reposted old Thought of the Weeks, this is the one that I avoid and the one that I won't reshare. And now I'm going to tell you all about it right here. So I'm just going to read the first couple like phrases in it, and then we can chat about it. But this is from 2021. And I said, Mary, woman, disciple, redeemed by the power of God, financier of the gospel message, discoverer of the empty tomb, witness of the Christ's resurrection, Too often we boil Mary of Magdala down to a prostitute whom Jesus had mercy on, a title that is never actually given to her in the text. A penitent sinner burdened by demons and brought out of suffering by the presence of the Almighty. So
Theology.
there's actually, as I read on in this thought of the week, there's plenty of things that I think are great points in it. And I'm trying to advocate for Mary as a legitimate disciple of Christ, as a legitimate person that was like looked over by the men around her. Like later on, I talk about how she goes and tells the male disciples that the tomb is empty, and they like don't believe her, and they go to see it for themselves instead of believing her word for it. And like how the only person that comforted her in her grief was the Christ, and nobody else like even took the moment to be concerned with her grief. So there's things like that I'm like, oh, I like that I discussed that, but I think it's the framing of one that I'm talking about her. I do recognize in this post that she's not called a prostitute in the text, but I think I don't do her justice in terms of really bringing home the fact that we have literally no evidence that she was a prostitute in any way. And this is a fiction that has been created through church history. And so that's one part where I cringe at this one. And it's not congruent. And I think that I didn't have the tools to go harder on that at the time that I would have now. And then also just the fact that I'm calling her like a penitent sinner and all these things, you know, like I'm really doubling down on like, while I'm acknowledging she maybe wasn't a prostitute, I am doubling down like this woman was redeemed and she needed redeeming and she was soiled in some way. And no longer soiled because of the Christ, but like that's just so far from the language that I use or the way that I think about people or like God anymore. Like this idea of sin is so out of my frame of reference. It's interesting to see this as like an in progress deconstruction of that ideology. And like I would have written very different things about Mary Magdalene 3 years before this post, you know? And now I would write even more different things about her. So it's something that I don't stand behind quite as firmly now in terms of what this post says, which is why I haven't reshared it.
I'd almost be interested to hear your revised version, though.
I know there's part of me that wants to rewrite it.
I think we need to rewrite it a little bit.
Yeah, because honestly, the first few lines, like, really gave me goosebumps. Like, still.
Really?
Yes.
I was, like, making fun of myself when I read it like that.
No, I loved it. Like, financier of the gospel message. I was like, yeah, bitch.
Yeah.
She was a wealthy woman.
Yeah. And I mean, you can even see there, like, I'm wanting to recognize her power.
Yeah.
And the fact that she was involved. Like, she was in it. And, like, even also, it was radical to me to be calling her a disciple. Because we were not raised with the concept of her being a disciple.
No, there's 12
any
disciples.
woman. Yes.
They're all men.
There's
They're all
12,
men.
period. That's it. But, like, there's literally these other women that were traveling with them doing the same things. Right. And we don't hear as much about them because they're in a patriarchal society. But how could she have not been a disciple?
I would say it's fair to say that we've all changed a lot in our theology in the midst of deconstruction, reconstruction, however you choose to see it, or whatever is true for the three of us, because I know we're all kind of in different places. But I had a lot of thoughts on how the church needed to make space for the secular and all these things. And so we're going to listen to another clip, and this will be interesting for all of us.
I think it has to come back down to the heart and the intention, you know, because we're always going to be, like, there's always going to be this interesting dance between secular culture and Christian culture. I think there's common ground and there can be space in the middle. But it's important to remember we don't have to be so different in the name of not sinning.
So this is really interesting because I appreciate what younger Kelly was trying to do. How she was like, we can all get along and we can all like create space. And the idea of like, we're not so different. Like, I do in a way still believe this. Like, I do believe that as humanity, we're not that different. However, I will say this is before I really deconstructed dominion theology and the belief that, I mean, Christianity is, you know, their message is go and make disciples of all nations. And the goal really is to try and make others, the secular world, however you choose to see it, look like the way they think they should look. And so unfortunately, I don't think there is common ground anymore because the church only gives up the power that it has to in moments of like change within history, within society. They pick and choose what they give up in order to continue to maintain power and influence. And I actually don't see this level of like inviting people in. Obviously, this is a broad generalization. I'm speaking specifically to the evangelical church in this context, but it's just interesting to see like Kelly, you know, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, would have said, oh, we can like have space for all of it. And Kelly today is like, unfortunately, the church doesn't make space for all of it. And so there can't be if the whole thing is like, you have to look like me. And then I continue on at about 10 minutes in.
We talk a lot in the church about pruning and on a personal level. Like we're like, oh, God's pruning me. My life is terrible right now. And I'm like, oh, great. But it almost feels like there's a level of that in the church, but the church doesn't love it because we're really locked into what we can predict and what we know. And sometimes when you move into pruning, like, okay, women don't have to wear skirts all the time anymore. They can wear pants. That's in a way like a pruning.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the church's opportunity to either get behind that or not.
So again, this is interesting because, you know, younger Kelly is trying to give the church an opportunity to basically get with the times, right? Like around then we're in the midst of COVID. We are in the midst of Black Lives Matter. We are in the midst now of like the post Roe versus Wade world. And there's so much that has been changing in the social landscape and important conversations being brought to light. And Kellyanne's trying to like almost extend an olive branch to the church. Like, this is your opportunity to get your shit together. And back to what I said earlier, I really don't see the church rising to that occasion. They only really give up what they really have to in order to stay in influence and power and control. And so I would say I've changed a lot in that sense. Like, sure, there are probably some really beautiful smaller denominations or churches doing great things and incorporating things like this. But evangelicalism, I think, as a whole is pretty extreme and is like, no, it's our way or the highway.
Yeah. And I mean, I think historically, a lot of the Christian church has been slow on the uptake of progress. You know, like there's I feel like often, whether it's white evangelicals or the Catholic Church and the papacy and everything, like they tend to drag their feet a bit whenever there's a push towards change, whether it was the anti-slavery movements, civil rights movements, feminist movements, sexuality, all of those things. The church at large is like slowly inkling behind until finally there's no choice but to fall in line, or else they will become entirely irrelevant. And I actually think one of the really cool things that has made like Christianity last so long is that it has adapted a lot over the millennia. But it's, I think, when people refuse to recognize the adaptability of the faith is when they are bringing in judgment, condemnation, pain, abuse, all of these things that come with refusing to acknowledge progress, acknowledge new information we have, new understandings of the world that we have, like the new understanding that women are not property
That's
or
a good
that,
one.
that women are not,
Incomplete men.
Exactly. And so recognizing, we have progressed as a society about this at large. When the church doesn't fall in line with that, that's when it really suffers and becomes really harmful and a place for breeding harm.
Which is really interesting when you look at the Bible. And I think the way that it's interpreted in mainstream evangelicalism, oftentimes it's positioned or it's presented in a way to frame God as someone who speaks to the time. Right? If you look at sort of the history of the Old Testament and into the New Testament, God comes into human spaces and speaks to their culture and makes rules based on their understanding of right and wrong, which is interesting. That
Because it was written by people.
Right, but God couldn't do that now. He only did that. I don't know. It's just interesting, like how we were like, oh, well, we can understand where God was coming from there, but like, there's no way he could change his mind here.
Yeah. Like literally there's literal changes of quote unquote God's mind in the Bible. So the idea that, we need to have this really rigid view, like this faith system just stopped changing after thousands of years of changing is a very wild idea. And it is, at the end of the day, I think what you're hinting at, Kellyanne, it is just a mechanism for power and control when it's like that. It's a mechanism for maintaining authority and being able to subjugate people to this belief system, which then allows you to have control over them and their money and their time and all of that.
Good one. I actually, one thing that I thought was fun as I was looking through old clips and old things that I've written was I found a thought of the week from 2021 that I titled Advice to Me. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I highlighted a few of them. I basically just listed some like different nuggets of advice for myself. And I think what's fun is now in 2024, how much of that like stayed with me throughout, but also just like the things that I was like, you need to figure this out, Kelly, at the time. Number one, I said, don't muscle your way through everything. Sometimes in the hard spaces, you just need to make peace with your pain. And so I think that was really reminiscent of how much pain there was with deconstructing and how much anger there was with the church and going through. And not that I am not angry or, not that it doesn't still pain me today, but like, I don't know. It really was bothering me then. I wrote, figure out how to be present.
Just figure it out.
Figure it out, Cal.
You do it.
I wrote, you don't need to better yourself to compensate for others' shortcomings. Sometimes people won't be enough for you, and that is okay.
I think that's a really good one. I really like it.
I still need to remember that.
You're standing by like, you can't control others. If someone's falling short of your expectation, if someone's not working with you, you can only do what you can do. And at the end of the day, you can sleep well at night with that. Like, I love that.
Consider my good girl conditioning so triggered.
No, exactly.
I'm like, ow.
Exactly. I wrote, you can ask for help when you need it and also when you want it.
Aww.
Poor babe. And your forgiveness is powerful. It is not a feel-good self-help strategy. The only beneficiary is the person you have forgiven, and that's the whole point.
Oh. Wow.
And that was like in opposition to like this, evangelical teaching on forgiveness and how it's good for you. And no, forgiveness is how God wants to transform you or whatever. And it's like, no, actually forgiveness is an act of selflessness. It is giving someone else a break when they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not forgiveness.
Yes.
This is not like a self-help, like whatever. And it maybe in the end does help you. But anyways, I think acknowledging it for what it is made it easier for me to process some of the unforgiveness that I had swirling around. Anyways, it was just really fun to read through that. And like, I look back on some things that we did or some things that I said, and I'm like, ooh, I'm so, ooh, I'm like, I love you, but also, ooh, so cringe. But that was one thing that I read through and I was like, oh, like, I was looking out for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was fun.
Yeah.
You were.
It's almost like we were I mean, I say we, you in the context of your thought of the week, but I think I saw this in all of our lives is we were teaching ourselves how to self-advocate.
Yeah.
Because in the church, there's not a lot of that. You're supposed to assimilate and not really like go against the grain. And like the very beginning was our tiptoeing into going against the grain. And then we just almost like slowly built up this self-advocacy muscle over the last 4 seasons. And I think that's so cool to look back on.
Well, and I also look back on some of these things and I'm like, so many of these things that I wrote were because I had friends that were also processing through these things and doing the work. And I was like, I got to figure this out too. And so...
Who are those friends?
Just a couple of gals. Just a couple of gals that I was deconstructing
I don't know
with.
them.
So, anyways, and then like, you know, we all had our different emphases on things that bothered us the most or whatever. But anyways,
Yeah.
that was
It's super
fun.
sweet to look back on and
Yeah.
feel that advice still resonates.
Yeah.
Like, that's so cool. It really, I think that's, in a way, it's very... I'm going to go very ooey-wooey. It's like mystical. Like you were speaking to your future self even then. And you had, because you know yourself better than anyone, you had the knowledge to give yourself and you're still giving it to yourself, which is just like, that's magic. That's
Agreed.
It is magic. I
Yeah.
have chills from that one. It's like a cosmic, like,
yes.
sending.
You're speaking to yourself across time.
Yeah.
Maybe I've been watching too much
Wibbly
Doctor
wobbly, tiny
Who.
I'm so here for it though. Because when you think about it, really, let's reverse that. Like right now, we're speaking love back to our past selves as well.
Yeah.
And like treasuring them and like, oh, I'm not in the same place that I was back then,
Yeah.
but still I care for you and I love you and I see the work that you were doing and I see the pain you were in and I validate that.
Yeah.
Which like, who else is going to do that for you? No one.
It's another thing I learned from Kellyanne. Was learning to love my inner child.
Oh. So Kelly actually found this fun clip for me of me talking about how I have it all, which sounds so presumptuous as a freaking 26 or however I old was. But I 100% have it all.
She's got it all, everybody.
Kellyanne, come to her for all the secrets of life
No,
and
no, no,
how
no.
to
She
succeed.
has it
She
all.
has it all.
I don't think there's a secret. I intentionally was like, hey, I want a partner in life. It really irks me when people are like, when people insinuate that there's still the expectation that even though you both work 40 hours a week, you come home as the wife and you clean and you prep dinner and do all these things while your husband just like around. And I'm like, no, like we will cook dinner together or we will switch off certain nights. And so like I made it really clear, I actually am not interested in being your mom. I want to have a partnership. And he knew that coming in. So, and that, in my opinion, that's the only reason I feel like I can say I have it all, because I intentionally was like, this is what I want and what I'm looking for. First of all, a moment for that blazer. That was a fun one. But yeah, it's so interesting and so cool to actually look back and see like where I was coming from then and the fact that it's still, that's one thing that hasn't changed. I do feel like I have it all. I have a really wonderful spouse that like he wants to be home and like hold down the fort. And so I get to go and do the things that are important to me. And that is so valuable. And I'm so grateful. And I recognize that not everyone has what I have. And I think something else that I talk about in that episode is you have to define what is all for you. Like, you can have it all, but you can't have it like all. You have to decide what your all is, and then you have to like define what that looks like. And I feel really grateful that James and I have both been able to define what our all is and then work towards helping to support each other in that way. And yeah, I mean, gosh, the whole reason I'm able to do all of this, to do this for 4 years, is because I have a husband that's like, go do it. See if I care. Make it happen. And I was like, okay.
Well, and it's not just see if I care. It's like, I'll support you in this.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, like it's not like do whatever the hell you want. I don't care.
No. Yeah, that's fair.
He's like, I
Dishes will be
actually,
full when you get home.
It's like, I think that you should do this. You're passionate about this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to fill in the gaps
Yeah.
while you do this.
Yeah,
You know?
the fact that I have a spouse that's willing to take up the slack of the chores on Saturday that have to get done in order for me to record for 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I actually think this is the first time that clip has made sense to me.
That's
Because
amazing.
always, whenever you said that, I was like, what the hell is she talking about when she says I have it all? And I feel like I tried to ask you at one point and just never really got an answer that made sense for me. And then you saying now, like, defining having it all for yourself makes so much more sense. Because when she was like, I have it all, I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. Like, you're still going after things. You still have goals.
Right.
Like, you're not, like, completed
No.
in terms of what all you want to do with your life. So I'm like, what do you mean you have it all? But when you're talking about it from the frame of reference of, okay, what does having it all mean to you? What does that look like for you to be happy with your life? That makes a lot more sense. And like when I think about it for me, it's like, what is having it all for me? Like that looks like having, you know, independence, and that looks like being able to travel and spend time with friends, and like that looks like not like using my money in a certain way in order to do those things. And using my time in a certain way in order to do those things that feel like this is what my all is right now. You know? So anyways, that just like finally clicked for me.
But I like what you were saying too, like, because I think giving yourself permission for your all to change as you change. Like the idea that we will have the same goals for the entire rest of our lives is like bananas. That's not going to happen. Like allowing it to change and revisit, but also accepting what your all isn't. I do not have a perfectly clean or organized house. I have a lot of clutter. Like there's a lot of things that that aren't just top priority. And that's okay. Like it's okay that it's not a top priority, because guess what? A perfectly organized and clean home is not a piece of my all.
Yeah.
It's just not. Anyways.
I liked that one about you because your confidence in it, because we like make fun of you because you're like, I have it all. And we're like, oh, she's got it all, everybody. Like, haha. And you're like, no, I do. There's no secret to it. Here's what it means. Here's what it means. And I thought that was fun because it's like, oh, there are like in this episode, we're pulling out things that we're like, oh, that's so different about us now. But there's also a lot of things about us that have sort of stayed constant, that are things that like we love about each other and admire about each other, and have enabled all of us to grow and become who we are and who we are becoming and all of those things. So anyways, I liked that one.
Thanks for finding it.
Speaking of, we have worked really hard.
Some would say on this podcast, we've had it all.
Yes. We have like gone after what we want. We've defined our all. We've redefined it every year, and amid seasons and whatever. And I think I'm so proud of it. I was curious, what are some of the moments throughout that have like, that you're really proud of, or that have, like, you know, I don't know, you remember and want to share?
I mean, I'm proud of all of it. I think we've done something that's really amazing and really hard, and we've done it ourselves.
Yeah.
No help.
Totally independently.
100% independently. And I think that's really rare and really amazing. But one thing that really sticks out is like, we won a like fucking award.
Signal award.
We won a Signal Award in the category of public service and activism, which I never, like when we began this, I never would have thought that would be a space we were in. And it was for a local story that was really, we cared a lot about and that we really thought was important and wanted to create space for. Yeah. And I'm so proud of that. Like we won an award for a podcast episode that was close to home and that we chose was important. And that just, I don't know. It's still a big deal to me. The fact that we are an award-winning podcast is just so special.
Yeah. Yeah. I do love that. Similarly to being award-winning, we're also in a school syllabus. Yeah. Or at least we were. I don't know if we still are. That. But like we connected with a professor of rhetoric at UC Berkeley, and she liked the podcast enough to be like, I'm putting this in my syllabus for my students as recommended listening. as they learn about how to write rhetoric. I'm like, excuse me, what? We're educational for students at UC Berkeley?
Yeah.
And I mean, similarly, like in terms of thinking about rhetoric and like sort of having healthy conversations, which I think is something that she saw in the podcast. One of the things that I'm really proud of on the podcast is, as we've been talking about this whole time, the ways that we've changed our minds or changed our stances. For me, a really pivotal episode was when we had Mike Mashiro on, and he, like, it was our first time having someone on from the stance of being openly affirming of queer people. And that was like at the start of the podcast, I was not affirming. And I had been creeping towards it over the years. And, but we had interviewed other people not from that frame of reference. And we finally were like, we're going to put ourselves on this line in the sand. And we're going to talk to this pastor who has come out as gay and does not think it's wrong whatsoever. And we're going to affirm him, not just listen to his story, not just give him a platform. We're going to agree with him. That was like really emotional for me and like felt scary. And since then, we've done more episodes surrounding that. And I think we've also done more episodes where we're like, we agree with this now. And I'm really proud of that and of getting to display that.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Similarly, our conversation about abortion.
Yeah.
I remember we discussed for the years leading up to the Dobbs decision, like, should we do an episode on abortion? And we felt very uncomfortable about it. It felt very tender. It felt very hot buttony and scary. And after, I think that was a bonus episode, actually. I don't think that's actually part of our, like, official
we came out
110.
of summer break.
Yeah, we were like,
that.
no, like, we need to talk about this. And I felt really proud of that, too.
And you were the one that rallied us. You were like, we have to do this. And we were like, okay.
Yeah, I remember, like, around abortion, maybe a year before that, I was having a conversation with a friend, and she had asked me if I still was pro-life, and I was. And I remember then, about a year later, I was actually with that same friend when the Dobbs decision was overturned, and she was excited about it, and I felt a deep pit in my stomach. I felt a deep pit in my stomach because I was like, ooh, I do not align with this anymore.
Yeah.
And this has changed so much for me in the last year. And that was because I took the time to actually listen to people. And I never had, like, actually listened to people who had had abortions or actually taken the time to educate myself around it. I just had adopted this stance because I was told it was right. And so to get to stand up and do that, to get to later on interview Katie Zay, who wrote the book that helped me work through that.
Katie Zay.
She's such a
What
gem.
a dream.
That was really special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really special. I think looking back, another one that I was really, really, really proud of is the fact that, like, our episode 3 was a review of Cuties.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't remember, listener,
This was a scandal.
this was
Yeah.
a scandalous film that people, like, there was this boycott of Netflix and people canceling their Netflix subscriptions. And we were like, what the hell is all this about?
Yeah.
So
Especially Christians.
Especially Christians. It was a big deal. And I mean, did we all work at a church at the time? I think we did.
Yeah.
No.
Or at least I did.
No, we didn't. It was our 3rd episode. We were out by then.
You both were. I was still working at a church, and everyone I knew was like, did you cancel your Netflix yet? And I was like, I'm not going to. And they were like, why? I was like, did you watch the film? And they were like,
of course not.
No. I was like, well, it's actually really beautiful. I loved it. And the fact that we were willing to, like, take a deeper look into something that no one else really was. Everyone just like took this like messaging that it's like child porn and just ran with it. And we were like, if you watch this movie, it's actually really good and it's saying a really important message that I think you should really care about, actually.
Yeah. It's beautifully done and in no way advocating for the exploitation of children. In fact, it's advocating for the opposite.
Yeah, literally that's the point of the film.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud looking back that we chose to do something like that so early on.
Yeah.
And I still like the movie.
Yeah.
So
It's a great one.
it is a good one.
I also remember we came out, this is another big episode that a lot of people have listened to. We came out and kind of shared our deconstruction update. And we specifically officially talked about Bethel specifically and how we worked there and attended there and what that meant. And that felt scary at the time, I remember.
Yeah, it did feel really scary.
Yeah, it did. I think there was always the fear, because Bethel is a large presence in this city, I think it feels like, oh, you're poking the bear almost, and that you could get some sort of response or an adverse reaction. And we actually got so much positive input from listeners who resonated and who related to it and who benefited from hearing our story, which I love.
Which actually it was the one thing I was going to add, which is I think for me, out of everything we've done, the thing I am most proud of is the DMs or the voice messages or the phone calls or the text threads with people who have listened to what we've done and have been impacted positively.
Yeah.
Like I have a gay friend who's getting married this summer, and we talked on the phone for like 2 hours after having not talked for a few years, and getting to relate to each other on this new level was amazing. And I felt so proud of like who I had or how I had changed in order to become a better friend to people I care about.
Yeah.
And how in, our, I don't know, rambling journal of a podcast, we've been able to positively impact people. We've been able to give other women the permission to explore these things that we needed and wanted. And so nothing that we have done or achieved means more to me than those.
Yeah. Agreed.
Those messages.
Agreed. And I love, like, that is one of the physical manifestations of actually, like, our intention of, like, come sit at the table and talk with us, and so that's kind of always been our thing. Like, come have a chat with us.
Yeah.
And so I love that we've had that. And that's really special.
Wow. I'm afraid to end this episode, but let's move into what is going on with Woman Being now.
Yeah. I wish we'd like written a statement.
I know. It's like a public sort of like a press release.
A press release, our public announcement.
I mean, Woman Being's going on pause. She's been a consistent, beautiful friend that we've loved and we've nurtured, but it's time for us to focus on some other things. And that doesn't mean she will never live or breathe again. She's out there forever on the internet, and that will never change.
All 110 plus episodes.
All for the worse and for the better.
For the worse and the better, as we've discussed. This doesn't mean that the door is forever closed for us, but we will not be resuming for a 5th season as of right now.
So it's like kind of our last episode, but also like the door's open.
But also like maybe some mini series at one point in the future. Who knows?
But the important thing, though, is we're doing this because of exciting life changes.
So many exciting things.
I'll go. Well, as you've probably know, I've had a baby.
Yeah.
She's
beautiful.
She is the most beautiful baby I've ever seen in my life. She is amazing. And
you're only slightly biased.
Not biased at all. It's objective, 100% objective opinion. And so I am now a mom. In addition to, I was accepted into London Film School. And so I will be getting my master's degree in London this fall. And so My focus is going to be on trying to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to do those two really big, really hard, really amazing things.
At
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah.
So just like, hashtag pray for me.
And also,
Oh.
get sleep and also stay hydrated and eat well and all the things.
Yes.
Probably go for a walk once in a while.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So anyways, take my vitamins. All
Yeah.
those things. So that is where my life is moving. My husband and I are in the deep midst of moving and selling our stuff and getting rid of all of our stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm leaving and I'm very
Yeah.
sad about it,
Yeah.
We're sad about it too.
but very excited.
But also so
Absolutely
proud.
Devastated, but also how dare you? Don't ever stop. You go. It's really hard to think about like you two have been such pivotal women in my life. And truly, I don't think that I would be who I am today without both of you. And woman being too. And all of the people that have supported us and come on the show and listened. That's truly, it's been such an important piece of my life. And I will never forget this special time. I also am doing different things. I'm trying to build a business, which is amazing.
You are building a business.
I am building a business. I'm the owner of Kelly Carter Inc., which is wild and fun and amazing. And I'm going through some different trainings. I'm now a certified somatic practitioner. I have a website that's functioning, which is crazy. And
Taking appointments.
You're
You're available to be booked.
available to be booked, which is also crazy. So that is where my focus is right now. And my fingers are crossed that it goes well. And, me and my husband are also like, okay, Reading's not our forever space. So where is our forever space? Or at least where's our next space?
Sure.
And we're not sure. So we're exploring. And who knows where we'll end up in the world. Frequently, we do joke about London. We just all moved to London.
That's where I would like you to move.
That would be a great time. I would live, laugh, love in London. But yeah, so it feels really special and really exciting. And there are other fun things I'm doing on the side. But for right now, my main focus is this.
And we're very proud of you.
Thank
so
you.
proud. She's
you.
been working so hard on her schooling and taking the time, taking your weekends to invest in yourself and invest in these skills that you want to build to create your business, which is so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
of course. I, Emma, I'm focusing now more on trying to build up my portfolio of work. I have been working on a documentary for the last, almost 6 months, I think now, since last October.
It's been a minute.
And working on a documentary, and I'm trying to build up and move into that space of documentary filmmaking and just more creative filmmaking than the current space that I'm in, which is advertising and marketing. And I think that while I love so much getting to do woman being, it takes so much of that time away from being able to do those things. And part of the only reason I've been able to work on this documentary so far is because we pared back to once a month for our episodes. But I think that it feels really right to be making the space. I remember actually 2 years ago during a retreat over the summer, I asked you two, is woman being getting in the way of the things that we want to do outside of it? And both of your answers were, right now we think that this is the thing we want to do. And I think now we've come to the point where it is getting in the way of those things that we want to pursue. And so it's the time for us. It makes sense for us right now to be stepping back and do the things that make us excited.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say thank you to all of our listeners and everyone that has been along with us in this entire journey. And to anyone who's recently joining and sifting through this anthology of work.
Yeah.
we have poured our blood, sweat, and tears into it. We have fought for this, I would say, and making it happen, and because we believed in it. And so it's very bittersweet to have to kind of set it down.
Yeah.
But I know that it's going to appreciate over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's an investment that we made in ourselves and our future, and it's good.
Yeah. And I would say, in a way, we still believe in it. You know?
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Like-
in all the ways.
In all the
Of course.
ways.
I'm just saying, like, you know, like we're setting it down, but like it's also like it's been a really beautiful space for ourselves, I think, for our listeners, and that doesn't just stop because we're not putting out new stuff. And so that's what's, I think, really cool. Like we've done something that kind of, it's forever.
But follow us along on our journeys. Emma's Instagram is at M.Davis-Williams.
Yeah. E.M. Davis Williams.
E.M. Davis-Williams. Kelly's website is,
KellyCarterSomatics.com.
and her Instagram is Kelly
Carter.
Carter
I think it's
Kellyanne.
Carter Kellyanne.
Yeah, Carter Kelly. And you can follow me at Kel Werner, KelWerner.
Yeah.
And we'll be having film school updates and documentary updates and somatics updates and all of the
Business
things.
Yeah. And I would encourage y'all to not unfollow Woman Being just because we're going to be dormant. Because, like Kellyanne said, you never know. We might be releasing new stuff in the future. We are not taking that off the table, but we're not making any promises.
We may or may not have like 2 to 3 series ideas already when we get the time to do them.
Yes.
So yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah. Stay tuned. Watch this space because you never know.
Yeah.
Your favorite 3 deconstructing feminist gals might show back up for you.
We might, yeah. So don't think you're safe. I wanted to close on a less than serious note with another little promo that we did.
Yay.
This was about an episode about the Twitter ban when Trump was kicked off Twitter, and we did an episode on it, and like, you know, free speech and like what is a public space and all that stuff. I don't even remember what we said on that episode. I'm kind of scared, honestly, but
I don't know either.
here is our promo for it, and we hope you enjoy. But guess what? I'm not even on Twitter anymore because it's the worst, and I hate it.
And their stocks plummeted.
And
You can't spell Twitter without Trump. It's a fact, people.
it's fine. They're losers. I'm on top. Guess who's winning? Me.
You know what I do after a long day doing nothing? I sit on Pinterest and I just remind myself, Trumpy, you're doing a good job. You're doing a fantastic job. You do a little spa night, a little masky mask, some self-tan, and some green tea bags. You're gonna look great. But that was a good one.
White man quotes.
Oh, look, there's a turmeric self-tanner recipe. I'm gonna look amazing.
Oh my God.
So you're welcome for that.
The fact that we put that out there is
Fantastic.
And we thought it was great.
Yeah.
We were like, that's gold.
And it was.
It's going to break the
hilarious.
internet.
Let's do
Maybe
it.
in, 2008 YouTube.
That's going to break
Yeah,
the
I
internet.
don't know.
Anyways.
Yeah. I just say it's wild because we don't like talk about politics like
No.
that. But we did a whole episode about
The Twitter ban.
the Twitter ban
Yeah.
with Trump. And I think a lot of that was us figuring out what we were doing
Yeah.
and what are our topics we talk about. There's a lot of all over the place episodes in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so.
And I'd just like to say, Woman Being is the best podcast
Oh my
out there
gosh.
everywhere.
Give us 5 stars.
Everybody says so. We're the best there ever was.
And so if you're going to remember us for anything, remember us for our great Trump impressions.
Yeah, it's truly
Objectively great.
Yeah, it's what you came for, what you stayed for.
Yeah. That's
So-
what the people want.
And this is leaning into Midwest goodbye territory. So we're actually going to close it right here.
Great.
We love you, Woman Beings. I love you.
Love you so much.
And
you.
I can't believe this is ending, but goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.